Welcome back to Alex's ESL World. Today I'm going to talk to you about reductions. So, do you ever think English is hard to understand? Do you think we talk too fast? Did you ever think that you speak fast in your language? Maybe you didn't notice, but I bet you do. If you haven't studied the IPA, you might want to refer back to those lessons and print out the handout that I put up on the website. I'll be using the IPA in this lesson. This lesson, as I mentioned, is about reductions. This just means that we shorten some words and expressions when we speak. We reduce things. The truth is that everyone uses reductions when they speak their native languages. You might just not be aware that you're doing it. These lessons are designed more for intermediate and advanced level students. I decided to focus on higher levels because there are a lot of resources for beginners on the internet, and I've spent a lot of time teaching advanced levels. So this one might not be for beginners, but it should help those of you who already know some English. Back to reductions. If you listened carefully to the first part of this video, you might have gotten a bit confused. I know some ESL teachers who speak like this, even when they are not teaching. They get into the habit of speaking slowly and enunciating every syllable so that beginner students will understand them. That's wonderful for their beginning students, but it makes native English speakers kind of crazy to listen to them. So let's look at what I first said to you. Do you think English is hard to understand? Do you think we talk too fast? Did you ever think that you speak fast in your language? I bet you didn't notice, but I bet you do. Now, if I said the same thing without using reductions, it would sound like this. Do you think English is hard to understand? Do you think we talk too fast? Did you ever think that you speak fast in your language? Maybe you did not notice, but I bet you do. Please don't ever expect a native speaker to speak to you like that. We won't. So you need to spend some time learning how to make these sounds, these reductions, and especially how to understand them. If you've watched any American movies or TV shows, you've heard lots of reductions. In this video, I'm going to start with ones you probably already know. Contractions. This is the first reduction most English learners are introduced to. These are very common. The subject pronoun plus the verb be. I plus am becomes I'm. You plus are is your. Don't say your. It's a contraction of you and are. It should be pronounced your. He plus is he's. She plus is she's. And it plus is sounds like it's. Be careful with this one. It's with an apostrophe, the little mark between the T and the S, tells us that a letter or some letters are missing. But ITS with no apostrophe is a correct word. It means something that belongs to it. For example, if you have a cat and your cat has a dish, you might call that dish its dish. Some people say his or her dish, but some people call their pets by it. This it's with the apostrophe means it is. We plus are is we're, and they plus are is their. Notice that it is not correct to use this in the past tense. There's not a contraction for I was. We can't say I's. It doesn't make sense. You were can't be your, because that's you are. He was can't be he's, that's he is. And the same goes for the others. Also, we plus were can't be we're, because that's we are. And they plus were can't be their, because that's they are. You can't make contractions with pronouns and past tense forms of be. I plus have is I've. You plus have is you've. He plus has is he's. Don't get confused. This is the same as he is. He's. I know I said we couldn't use we're for we were because we already used it for we are, but English isn't always so logical. You can tell whether someone is saying he's for he is or for he has from the context or other words in the sentence. She plus has works the same way. It's she's, just like she is. And the same is true for its. I will say this, he's, she's, and its are usually he, she, or it is. It's more common. We plus have is we've. You've is the same, singular or plural. And they plus have is they've. To make contractions with have in the negative, it's a little different. In this case, we need to keep the subject pronoun without any contraction and add the contraction to have plus not. So it's I plus have plus not, or I haven't. You plus have plus not, or you haven't. He, she, or it has not, or he, she, or it hasn't. For the plurals, we plus have plus not is we haven't. They plus have plus not is they haven't. You get the idea. To make the contractions with have in the negative, it's a little different. Here we have to make the contraction between the verb and not. We don't contract the subject pronouns with have in the negative. So it becomes I haven't for I have not. You haven't for you have not. He, she, or it hasn't for he, she, or it has not. We haven't for we have not. And they haven't for they have not. Now let's look at the past tense of have and see how we make these contractions. I plus had is I'd. You plus had is you'd. He, she, and it plus had becomes he'd, she'd, and for it, it's it'd or id. For the plurals, we plus had is weed. It sounds like the undesirable plant in your garden, a weed. And finally, they plus had is they'd. I have to mention before I leave this one that a pronoun plus had is going to sound exactly the same as a pronoun plus would. So, I'd can mean I had, or it can mean I would. It's the same for all of them. There are many other contractions, but these are some very common ones. There is or there has can be theirs. You'll need to listen to the context to know if theirs means there is or there has. And there's one more word that sounds exactly like this, and it's theirs. When something belongs to them. The rest of these are actually modals, or helping verbs that have some amount of possibility or an idea about the future. Can plus not becomes can't. I can't come to the party. I have too much work to do. Could plus not is couldn't. Mary couldn't do her homework last night because she left her book at school. Would plus not is wouldn't. Wouldn't it be wonderful if everyone in the world were nice? Should plus not is shouldn't. Shouldn't you study biology before you go to medical school? Did you notice I said shouldn't you? Listen for these. And the last one is probably the most common, but it's irregular. It's will plus not, which becomes won't. This one is about something that will not happen in the future. For example, We won't have cold weather in Southern California until midwinter. It's true. Continuing with modals, let's look at what happens when we add have to some modals. I'm using the IPA here to show exactly how the pronunciation looks and also to show you the correct spelling of these. The contraction for could have is spelled C-O-U-L-D apostrophe V-E, but it's usually pronounced more like could've or even coulda. Yeah, it's true. Listen to native English speakers when we say something like, I could have been here sooner, but I was stuck in traffic. The next one is would have, which is spelled similarly and pronounced would've or woulda. I would have been here sooner, but my car wouldn't start. The last one is should have, and that one works the same way. Should have or shoulda. It's how we say this. Tom should have done his homework. He would have done better on the quiz if he had. What happens when we add not to this group of words? Take a look. Could not have becomes couldn't have. But we don't usually say it like that. We usually say couldn't have or just couldn't. Remember Mary who didn't do her homework? Well, we could say Mary couldn't have done her homework because she left her book at school. Wouldn't have becomes wouldn't have or wouldn't. I wouldn't have been surprised if Mary's teacher had been angry. And shouldn't have sounds more like shouldn't have or, you guessed it, shouldn't have. The auto repair shop shouldn't have told me my car was ready. It's not. A really common contraction form is when we put different words with the preposition to. Even when we just say the word to in a sentence, it usually just sounds like ta. For example, I might say, I'm going to the store. It's almost like I just made a T sound. Let's have a look at these words. Going to is almost always gonna. He's going to have a meeting at 10. I didn't include it in the chart here because it's pretty severe, but sometimes we cut this one even more, especially when we use it with I. For example, I'm going to go now. You don't have to use this one at all. I suggest you listen carefully to these when you hear native speakers. I want you to be able to understand us. Remember that the most important thing for you is that you can understand the native speaker and the native speaker can understand you. That's it. Okay. You've got gonna. The next one is got to, which becomes gotta. The classic example is I gotta go, or just gotta go. Have to becomes have to. We have to finish our work before we leave. Ought to becomes oughta. Ought to means the same as should. It's more common in some parts of the country than in others, and it's used for giving advice. You ought to improve your diet if you want to be healthier. Want to is shortened to wanna. I want to write a book someday. The next group is various words with the preposition of. The first one is kind of, and it sounds like kinda. This pronunciation is kind of easy. Sometimes we'll just say kinda. If we add an S to this, it sounds like kindsa. Remember, voiced sounds together and voiceless sounds together. I saw all kinds of cheeses in France when I was there last year. Lots of becomes lotsa. There are lots of things to learn when you study a foreign language. Out of sounds like outa. I wanted to make a salad last night, but I was out of lettuce. And sort of is reduced to sort of or sorta. You might hear some people use this as a filler in their speech, like when people use words like that really have no meaning. I'm not talking about someone being fond of something. I'm talking about people who use the same word to help themselves when they can't think of what they want to say. Fillers can be distracting if they're used too much. Sort of is used by some people as a filler, but it's not always used as a filler. It's used to compare something that's similar to something, but not exactly. It's the same as kind of. Her eyes were sort of blue, but with green flecks in them. It's very common for us to say these expressions in a very shortened way. Let me becomes lemme. Let me show you how to make these sounds. Give me your paper. Bet you didn't know how to say that. Bet you, or betcha, is a slang expression meaning I challenge you. Don't you need to practice more? I'm going to come get you about 7 o'clock to go to the movies. Did you notice I said I'm going to come? Again, you don't have to do this, but I want you to understand when you hear it. I got you a present for your birthday. Did you know English could be so much fun? I want you to know that I care about your progress. Would you like to have a piece of cake? Speaking of a piece of cake, do you know the expression piece of cake? It means something's really easy. So is English pronunciation a piece of cake? I hope so. So let's move on to the next slide. Do or did plus a verb. Now we've come to 3-word reductions using do or did plus a verb. The first one here is so common. Everyone says, I don't know, when asked if they know something and they don't know the answer. I have a cousin in the South where I come from who once schooled me on the way to ask if someone has eaten. He said, "Jeet?" I tend to say, "Did you eat?" Then there's did you have or "'Ju have?" As in, did you have breakfast yet? And then we have did you ever or did you ever? As in, did you ever try skydiving? Not me. Next, do you wanna? It's almost like Tijuana. It works in sentences like this. Do you want to go to the movies? These are expressions in question form. All of them use a WH word. There's some very common expressions. Let's start with, how are you? Isn't that easier than how are you? The next one is, how do you? Like, how do you pronounce the word S-E-W? How do you? The answer is we pronounce it so. Using the past, we'd say, how'd ya or how'd you? Like if we're asking someone, how'd you do that? How'd you? Then, what are ya? Like, what are you doing? Or on Halloween, you might ask a child in a costume, what are you supposed to be? Finally, if you make a new friend, you might want to ask them what they do for a living. It's common in the U.S. to ask this in small talk. You'd say, what do you do? It might surprise you, but we all probably know exactly what you're asking, even though we do much more than what we do on our jobs, just like everybody else in the world. On to the next slide, where I have more expressions. Here's some more expressions using WH words. The first is wantcha. A teacher might say to you, I want you to complete page 5 for homework. Or maybe the teacher wants to ask you on a Monday what you did over the weekend. They might say, what'd you do over the weekend? What'd ya? Maybe you showed up late for a party. Someone might ask, when'd you get here? When'd ya? Maybe you had your hair cut and you look marvelous. Someone might say, you look great. Where'd you get your hair done? Or they might say, who'd you go to have your hair done? Or who'd you go to have your hair done? Sometimes we say who'd ya, sometimes we say who'd you. And that's my presentation on reductions. This one is not an exact science. Americans speak differently from each other depending on the region they live in. Also, this is not all of the reductions there are. This is an introduction to the idea of reductions. There are plenty of them used. Really, this is about how native speakers speak. We know the language so well that we take shortcuts. I believe this is true in all languages. You might not realize that you do this too in your language, but if you listen carefully to others and to yourselves, you might be surprised at the shortcuts you make. That's all for this lesson. I'd love to hear from you if you have any questions or comments. Thanks for watching, and remember to be kind to each other. Bye.